Hey, theology class. I want to start the day, if you will, with a little bit of devotional thought that's not really that connected to our usual topic, but at the moment, I feel compelled to share with you a little something that I've been chewing on recently. It comes from the pen of John Newton. He's the writer of Amazing Grace, if you know that old hymn. But he has a little word here about um, God-centeredness and being all satisfied in God, in the way that has the power to sort of be an anchor and ballast for your life, both when times are good and when times are difficult. And now that we're in the perhaps sort of dead middle of this online school thing, and I'm sure you have kind of crystallized the things that frustrate you and are unpleasant about this situation. I have been encouraged by this word from John Newton, so I wanted to share it with you. He says, "A delight in the Lord's all-sufficiency, to be satisfied in Him as our present and eternal portion. This, in the sense in which I understand it, is not the effect of a present warm frame. In other words, it's not just simply a sort of good, fuzzy feeling, but of a deeply rooted and abiding principle. It's kind of a deep heartbeat of the Christian to be satisfied in God at the deepest level, the habitual exercise of which is to be estimated by the comparative indifference with which other things are regarded. In other words, you can measure whether or not you're all satisfied in God by the relative indifference with which you consider and regard and are sort of thrown off by other things. He goes on, the soul thus principled is not at leisure to take or to seek satisfaction in anything but that which has a known subserviency to this leading estate. In other words, any other thing is not worth pursuing satisfaction in unless it serves the purpose of bringing you further and further into being satisfied in God. He says, either the Lord is present, and then He is to be rejoiced in, or else He is absent, and then He is to be sought and waited for. They are to be pitied who, if they are at some times happy in the Lord, can at other times be happy without Him, and rejoice in broken cisterns when their spirits are at a distance from the fountain of living waters. I do not plead for an absolute indifference to temporal blessings. He gives us all things richly to enjoy, and a capacity of relishing them, enjoying them, is His gift as well. But then the consideration of His love in bestowing them, in even giving them, should exceedingly enhance their value, and a regard to His will should regulate their use. Nor can they all supply the want or the lack of that which we can only receive immediately from Himself. This principle likewise moderates that inordinate fear and sorrow to which we are liable upon the prospect or the occurrence of great trials. In other words, this principle, this reality of being all satisfied in God, it is able to keep your life from being this massive roller coaster, high highs and low lows, and up and down and up and down and up and down. He says there's a sure support and resource provided in the all-sufficiency of infinite goodness and grace. And then this last line was perhaps most meaningful to me. I want to commend it to you. What a privilege is this, to possess God in all things while we have them, and all things in God when they are taken from us. So wherever you're at in this adventure, as we have about a month left in school, I invite you, especially in the parts that are difficult, not to be embittered, not to succumb to a complaining, frustrated spirit, but to use potential difficult times as an opportunity to grow your dependence upon the Lord, to be more satisfied in Him than you might otherwise be, to cherish Him, to love Him, to delight in Him, to refocus your heart's affections on the Lord instead of on the things in this life. And indeed, one of the effects that will have is actually to increase your enjoyment of whatever it is you're doing as well. That being said, I'd like to turn to our word for the week. No pun intended. I'm going to give you a break this week since we finished up the Sayers article. You guys did a great job with that. I was very pleased with the things that you wrote for me each week. I hope that you learned something from her. May not agree with everything that she said, but I hope that she gave you perhaps a fresh or even a new view on what it means to work as a Christian. That good work done well, chiefly for the Lord, is what it means to work in God's world as a Christian. Not chiefly for money, although most of the time we need money to live and eat. Not for acclaim, not for the approval of man, but for the smile of God and the satisfaction of work done well. But for this week, nothing to read. There will be a writing assignment, a brief one, but I will discuss that later in this lesson. And as usual, you should email that to me by Friday, May the 8th at 3 p.m. And then, of course, you ought to keep watching this particular video. And leave a comment at the end of the video. In the comment, I'd like for you to tell me what your dream job is, within reason, but what is your dream job, and what is one of the ways that you think your dream job will experience the brokenness of the fall? So what is the job that you really hope to have one day, and then what is one way that job experiences the brokenness and the twistedness of the fall? We've discussed some of the ways that the fall has broken the world, and we'll discuss one more today. Reminder again of where we've been. We talked about some of the wrong approaches to work. We talked about God's design for work. He's the chief worker and we imitate him. Cultivation and service are the two great strands of our work, and all work from top to bottom has great inherent dignity as it imitates and images God in the world. Work involves both development and maintenance and repair, and each kind of work experiences one or all of those in some fashion. And so that's kind of the positive look at the way that God designed work to work in the world. But we also have begun to consider the way that work has been broken by the fall. And it's important for us to understand how sin and the general brokenness of the world affects our work, so that we're not just completely thrown off our rocker when work doesn't go well, so that we don't give in to despair when work would seem to be fruitless and pointless. But we recognize that work is not the problem per se. It is the twistedness and brokenness that the fall has brought to our work. And so we don't point the finger necessarily at the work itself, but we seek to to redeem the work as best we can. This week, we're going to dig into the last aspect of the way that the fall has affected work. And it's perhaps, you might say, the most fundamental. We know that God, as we've considered already, has designed work as a way for us to both sort of create in imitation of Him and kind of bring out the wonders of the created order, to squeeze the potential for beauty, order, and goodness out of the created world that God has made for us to dwell in. And work is a means for us to be an instrument of God's providence by serving the needs of our neighbor. So our work is to be cultivation and service. Yet at the same time, because of sin, our work has become fruitless and pointless. Now, what we're going to consider today is kind of the foundation or the sort of headwaters for why our work chiefly becomes fruitless and pointless. This tends to happen very often all over the place today because we tend to turn our work into a way to sort of distinguish ourselves from our neighbor. We use it as something to sort of get ahead or to assert ourselves or to try to sort of show the world and even ourselves that we are something special. We often can use work as a way to accumulate power and security, and indeed often to exercise sort of control over our destiny. And I want to talk a little bit about the foundation for that. Sorry, I got my slides a bit out of order this week. To kind of dig into these themes of the way that our work is something that we actually kind of use as a tool for self-promotion, self-gain, so on and so forth. I want to consider an old story from the very beginning of Genesis. So will you read along with me and kind of look for what might be going on in the heart of the tower builders at the Tower of Babel. You may remember some of this from Old Testament if you have a good memory, but I want to return to it now. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the world. Of all the earth. So, what I want to offer here in Genesis 11 is we kind of see an example of the way that work can become a tool for the fabrication of our self-worth. Work can become a tool for the fabrication or the manufacture of our self-worth. Another way to put that would be work reveals our idols. Much of this, again, as I've said before, is drawn out by Keller in his book, Every Good Endeavor. If you're super interested in reading this book, if this is topic has piqued your interest, I discovered a second copy that I happen to have at home. I'll loan it to you if you're interested. But our work has the power to actually reveal what our idols are. To kind of get at this, why do you think the tower builders were using bricks instead of stone? Or perhaps more particularly, why does the author of Genesis, Moses, tell us that they, right there in verse 3, they had brick for stone, or brick instead of stone, and bitumen for mortar? What exactly is going on there? Bricks were what you might consider a technological advance of the age. They were the smartphone of the ancient world, as it were. They were a great technological advancement that enabled these people to build better, higher, more solid, more lasting buildings. So as much as it might be difficult to conceive of or understanding, to understand, bricks were like cutting edge technology in this day. And so these people have become incredibly advanced. They are the most skilled laborers in the world, building this incredible building at the cutting edge of technology. But I think what is most interesting about this passage is not their technological advance, but what you might say the motivation for their advancement and work. It's one thing to produce or to come up with an incredibly new technology, but it's a whole nother thing to ask, why? Why are we creating this technology? Why are we putting so much effort and work into this thing? Sorry, I had to get myself a drink. So on the surface, you have this great technology, but I want to probe down into what exactly is going on in at the level of motivation of these tower builders. And you can imagine asking this question about some of our great technologies today. I mean, we have wondrous new developments everywhere you turn. And yet, what if we were to pause and kind of ask, why are we producing a new model of this piece of technology or that one every year? Why are we advancing at such a magnificent rate? Let's ask that question of the tower builders. Why are they doing what they are doing? I would propose that there are kind of three big motivations for these tower builders. The first one, I think, is to maximize their security. Notice that they are building a city. Cities in the ancient world, and certainly, I guess in some sense, in our world, but especially in the ancient world, were places where security and affluence were able to thrive in a way that was not possible, as it were, in the wilderness. And sort of business connection, streamlining your entrepreneurship and business could happen to a greater degree in a city. And so security, even in some sense from the elements, from enemies, could be had in a city. So security, maximizing security, is one of their motivations. But also notice that they're trying to build not just a city, but a tower with its top in the heavens. What exactly is going on there? When I was a kid and I read this story, I thought that they were literally kind of trying to build their way to God, who was, up there, and they were going to give him a high five and call it a day. But that's not quite what's going on here. If you remember the old, from your history classes, perhaps the old ancient ziggurats were kind of like ancient temples. How about that? I'm just going to, since I'm so far into this, I'm sure you've noticed that my computer thinks it's smarter than me. It's trying to update. We're going to push that back. Where was I? I'm so sorry. Top in the heavens. They're building this massive tower, not to give God a high five, but rather, this was probably something of a ziggurat, and these things acted as ancient temples. They were actually sort of, you might say, halfway houses between heaven and earth where people could access the gods. And so these tower builders in Babel are, in a sense, they're imagining themselves getting to the place of heaven, as it were, which is really the place of control over one's destiny. If I can get myself in connection with the gods, indeed in the very place of the gods themselves, I assume a place of power and control over my life. So these tower builders are after power and control over their own destinies. They want the power of the gods in the palm of their hands. But notice also that they say, let us build blah, 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 blah. Let us make a name for ourselves. Not only are they after security that a city would bring, and also the power and control over their own destiny, but they are after what you might call glory, or in some sense a sort of legacy that is everlasting or eternal, something that would perhaps even transcend their own lifetime. So security, control and power, and glory. Do you see that those lie underneath the incredible work and technology and advancement of these tower builders? And do you see how that is so relevant for you and I, especially in this case you, as you head out into the working world to sort of do something with your life? You ought, I hope you've seen in Sayers, do good work, pursue excellent work, and yet consider the motivations that lie under your excellent work. Have they become, or perhaps are they going to be susceptible to selfishness? This whole lesson is supposed to be about the way that the fall has twisted our work and makes it liable to selfishness as its great motivation. And the sort of threefold selfish pursuit here is security, control, and self-glory. Security, control, and self-glory. Will you consider the ways that those might creep into your motivation for work? So this work here has actually kind of unmasked, perhaps for these tower builders, idols that lie underneath what they're seeking. Idols of security, idols of power and control, idols of self-glory. So if you will, sort of consider these things in a bit more contemporary and practical way. What do you think your work itself would look like if you happen to have an idol of comfort and pleasure? Perhaps your work is only ever going to be a means to an end. You're working the job that makes you the most money so that you can create the most comfortable life for yourself and buy the most toys that you can to give yourself a pleasurable life. You may be a very hard worker, but it won't be about the work itself. It'll be about what the work can get for you. What do you think your work would look like if you have an idol of power and control? Think of the ways that you might relate to your co-workers. You certainly would not be satisfied with a job that's lower on the totem pole, a lower rung on the ladder. You're going to have to be over people. You're going to have to be in management which might not be bad, but if this is one of your idols, then the way that you work, your tireless determination to get ahead and sort of be on top of your life, as it were, may be kind of unmasked by your work. What do you think your work would look like if you have an idol of approval and self-image? The sort of way that you work day in and day out will be marked by a great deal of people-pleasing. You're not going to work for the work itself. You're going to use your work as a tool of self-gratification and approval from the people around you, and perhaps even as a way to kind of garnish your reputation and establish yourself as a successful person. Your work will be a means to the end of proving to the world and to yourself that you are something, right? So think of all the different ways that your work can actually peel back the layers of your idolatry and help you unmask it. To kind of put it the other way around, making a name for yourself through work and seeking chiefly your own security and pleasure through your work will cultivate sort of several things, several character traits in you as you work. So if you're seeking only to make a name for yourself, seeking your own security, power, control, pleasure, comfort, your work is going to be marked by several things. You're going to have either a superiority complex or perhaps an inferiority complex toward other people in your line of work. If they're better than you, you're going to spite them. If they're worse than you, you're going to look down on them because work has become your identity. Again, we're trying to understand how work has been broken by the fall, specifically how work has the potential, because of our sin and brokenness, to become selfish. So this is not meant to be like a beating stick to beat you and I over the head. It's meant to encourage self-reflection and self-understanding. You're going to experience a great deal of pride and envy. Again, that superiority piece, but you may be incredibly jealous of the people around you who are better than you. If work has become an idol for you, or if it's become kind of a means to scratch the itch that those idols underneath are giving to you, you're going to experience perhaps a great deal of, you might call it dog-eat-dog competition. You're going to be, you could care less if other people fail or get behind or are dragged down, as long as you are ahead. You may be willing to make shady business deals just to get ahead and just to get your gains. And so you may have a complete disregard for others. As long as you get yours, you're going to be fine. You're also probably going to experience a great deal of diminishing returns on your work. In other words, if you're using work to get to security, reputation, pleasure, these selfish things, your work is going to give you less and less of the hit, of the high that you need from it. And so this is why we have such a thing as a workaholic. Work is going to require more and more and more of you to get what you want out of it. You're also going to experience a rather paradoxical increased anxiety, worry, and fear, because you're going to be constantly living in this space of wondering if you're going to lose that security, if you're going to have enough pleasure on the weekend or enough vacations. You're going to continually worry if people do, in fact, approve of you and your success. So consider some of the ways that your work, especially as you kind of anticipate it, may be deeply affected by our potential to have selfish hearts. Work and perhaps relationships are the two places I think where our selfishness is most exacerbated and exposed. So give yourself to some self-reflection about your motivation for the work that is before you as you head off into college and beyond. What are some ways that you may be susceptible to the selfishness of work? How can you seek to put that to death? To kind of catapult us into what we're going to talk about next week, the gospel frees us from this selfish motivation for work. When we receive our identity, our name, our security from God, then we're free to do our work as loving service to Him and loving service to our neighbor. As long as we need work to give us something as a means to an end, we're only ever going to be takers. And we're going to experience a great deal of anxiety and worry because of our selfish approach to work. But the gospel allows us to receive our identity, our security, our pleasure, our name, our glory from God. And therefore, that frees us to work out of service to Him, loving service to our neighbor. And that's what we're going to get into next week, is how the gospel changes the way that we work. This week, what I'd like for you to write involves this idea. Imagine you get to the end of your life and you're able to look back and say, I have worked well for the glory of God. What are some things that will have characterized your work? What will bring you the most satisfaction as you reflect back on your life? I really kind of want you to think about the flip side of this concept of the selfishness that work can involve. Doesn't have to, but that's one of the ways that sin has broken our work, as it were. But I want you to think about the flip side. If you get to the end of your life, I want you to imagine that you live a long, full life and you are kind of looking back on it and you're satisfied. You can say, I've worked well for the glory of God. But what are some of the highlights of your working life? What did you do? What did you accomplish? What are you satisfied in? This is kind of an imagination piece. Use your imagination to think about your working life, and write me a half-page double-space reflection on your imagined life's work. If you have any questions about that, shoot me an email. I hope you enjoy thinking about this as you anticipate the work that you will do for the rest of your life. That's all we got for today. I hope you guys do well this week in your work. I will be praying for you in your hearts. May you enjoy God supremely in and above all things this week. I love you guys.